Hi, my name is Kat Small, and I am here to talk to you about forging your own path and navigating the games industry as a creator of color. I'm an independent game developer and also the co-organizer of the Game Devs of Color Expo, which is an annual event that is in its ninth year as of this September. Wild stuff. It's going to be mostly virtual this year, which is going to be really fun. We've been virtual since 2020, and we have really focused our energy on showcasing some of the amazing talent that has come from around the world. We started in New York in particular, so we're very focused on making sure that we're always sharing our local New York talent in addition to the amazing, incredible folks that we have every year from all across the United States, Canada. We've had folks from all around the world, from different parts of Latin America. We've had folks from South Africa as well, for example. Truly, this is a global event, and hopefully you'll be there. Tickets are super affordable in case you want to check it out. They start at as low as $20 and go all the way up to $100 if you really want to support the event. Outside of the work that I do at Game Devs of Color, I am also an independent game developer, and I design websites and apps at Dropbox as well. Today, as I said, I'm going to talk through thoughts about different pathways into the gaming industry. But first, I'm going to start by talking about how I got into games. The first thing I did is when I was in college, so about 15 or so years ago, I started volunteering my skills with a couple of friends who were mostly engineers, and they didn't have any designers. The nice thing was that I was a graphic design major and I actually had a fine arts background, and so I was able to volunteer my skills as an artist and support them through their engineering work. And so we were able to come together essentially and to create a really talented team of people who could make some video games. So what you see right here is actually one of the first games that I contributed to, which was a really silly prototype where a ghost cat needed to catch art that was falling from the skies and put it on the wall in this weird museum. We kind of kept going from there and then started joining game jams, which are essentially these short term amounts of time. They might be 48 hours, for example, where you come together with a small group of people and you usually have a theme of some kind, and you essentially try to build a game according to the theme within the amount of time you are given. So this is an example from a hackathon or a game jam rather that my friends and I actually joined. And in this case, it was for a new piece of technology that was kind of like this table. And so it was like a table with a touchscreen on it, and the goal was for people to make games for it. And there were lots of other experiences that we had like that with new operating systems, for example. So game jams can be a really great way to also experiment with new technology, to meet new people, and to really push your skills. From there, I continued to make more and more stuff. So I started to actually make a lot of my own games after getting comfortable with some of the game engines that I learned about through working with my friends. And it actually led me to the world of really just expanding my skills and starting to experiment in terms of subject matter. So I started to make games about things like breakups and to think about how I could make a multiplayer game where the main line of the story is essentially to keep some angry exes from interacting with each other. I also started to make games about identity. So for example, I made a game that was all about essentially a younger version of myself, and it was really interesting to explore just some of the things that I experienced through the lens of actually creating game mechanics. So that was really enjoyable. I also made a ton of other things, and one of my shining and crowning moments really was getting to see one of the projects that I made actually built into an arcade cabinet and put in a museum in London. So this is Breakup Squad, and this is actually a custom-made cabinet that is in the V&A Museum. And so there were lots of little moments like this where I was really proud of the work that I did. And I have definitely always loved the gaming industry and games themselves. They connect people, they make you think, they give you the chance to experience a different life than the one that you have. But at the same time, I think we are very aware that things can be kind of intense. So a lot of indies are out there. It's a really treacherous landscape, especially right now. There are some positives about the gaming industry. So, through all this creativity here, we've generated a ton to the US economy. Lots of people spend money on games. That is very well known. I'm sure there are a couple folks watching this who have probably spent a ton of money on things like skins, for example. I myself am a very intense lover of the game Splatoon, and if they did have skins, I would have totally bought them because I wanted to support the devs. And there are lots of other examples of just the way that games have really contributed to the economy in the United States. But at the same time, we're constantly seeing these layoffs that are happening, and I didn't know this. I looked this up. I was just looking for some data, and it turns out that Wikipedia just has a page for the layoffs that have been happening for the past year, which truly blows my mind. So it really speaks to the challenging moment that we are in at this particular time. I also wanted to call out that there is still a lack of diversity within this industry. So these are some stats that were pulled. I believe it was from the IGDA, which is the Game Developers Association. There are also reports that get put out by GDC, the Game Developers Conference. And essentially, we kind of are in a similar situation that we've been in for a while. This is, I suppose, not like the worst when you look at specifically white folks, since that's approximately, I believe, around where they're at in the United States at large. But when you start to look at some of the other representation, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know about that. Especially looking at things like gender, for example. So there's a lot of work to do, and sometimes it can feel pretty isolating. You can end up kind of feeling like this, especially when you start to look at some of the harassment campaigns that have happened. These are real people who are working in this industry, and they're getting targeted. You've got all kinds of challenges. You've got the layoffs. You've got these moments where you try to pitch your game, for example, and people don't get the idea. There are all kinds of things that can really put you down. And so I just wanted to make sure to take a moment to acknowledge that fact, but to also, make sure that we counter that. So I'm going to share some of the lessons that I have learned through the many years at this point that I've been within the industry itself. So I started really more seriously paying attention and investing in my work as a game developer back in, I think it was about 2012 or so, which is wild to think about. But I've definitely learned a lot during this process, and hopefully this can shortcut some of the effort that you yourself have to put in. So the first lesson is I really recommend that you find your people. This industry is really all about who you know. That can be a good thing. That can be a challenging thing. You're going to know when you find your people, and you need to make sure that you stick with those people, that you build community together, and that you invest in each other. You can do that by joining game jams, for example. So these are a couple of options that occur throughout the year. Itch.io always has something new. Melanated Game Kitchen is a great resource for coming up with new ideas and meeting new people. Usually MGK is actually very POC. It really draws in a lot of folks of color, so I would really recommend checking them out. Global Game Jam is also a great opportunity. It happens once a year in January, and so you can always plan for that particular month. They have a great game jam community that comes out, and different locations will put on different events as well. I also recommend attending local events. So New York has a ton of them. These are just a couple of examples. Obviously, the event that we're at right now is one of them. Game Devs of Color Expo also sometimes has local events in the city. New York Public Library has some things as well. Gumbo is mostly in Brooklyn, but they also have games events. Playcrafting has also been around for a while as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to connect with people locally, and I really recommend doing that as much as you feel safe and comfortable to do, because the more that you see people, it's really like that repetition. The more you see people over and over again, you start to remember their names, their faces. People start telling you about events, And it's a really great way to make sure that you're building genuine connection, because that's essentially really what networking actually is. It's really, again, finding those people who get you and just making sure that you're continuously connecting with them over and over again. You can also, of course, use social media. So obviously the landscape's a little weird right now. But if you go on a service like Blue Sky, kind of Threads maybe, I guess kind of LinkedIn, there are still some people on what was Twitter. Game Dev, the hashtag, and Screenshot Saturdays and hashtag Indie Dev are some great ways to connect with folks. I know that on Blue Sky, for example, they also have a list that you can get added to that is just game developers. So there's a lot of different options out there as well. The next lesson is that there is no correct path. This is something that I think really can hit people hard, thinking, oh, I need to fully, jump knees deep into the industry. I need to, do this or that, or I'm not a game developer. There are lots of different forms of being a game developer, and nobody can ever take that title from you. It's really important to consider your own personal needs, especially as a creator of color. A lot of times we might not have the same emergency net, like we can't really have the same situation as somebody who's really potentially set up more, who maybe has a little bit more of a safety net if necessary. So make sure that you're taking precautions if, you can't be in a situation where you get laid off twice in a year, 3 times in a year, which absolutely has happened to people. So, if you need to have that day job so that you can do your indie thing, if you need to do like part-time somewhere else in some other kind of position, that's valid. If you want to work in tech like I did and I do, that's incredibly valid as well. You can still be a game developer. That might look like, for example, having accountability time that you schedule pretty regularly so that you're still working on your projects. And so, for example, I actually have an accountability time that I do at least once a week with people where I meet up over video or Discord and we just work together for 2 hours. And it really, really helps to just have that focused time. So if you're not doing it full time, that's okay. Games like Stardew Valley were made over long periods of time, and it's something that a lot of developers in particular have done. Of course, obviously, you can also do things like go to competitions, you can get grants. Game Devs of Color Expo offers grants to people, for example. You can go to different game jams that actually offer winnings. So some of the more sponsored events will actually offer you the opportunity to earn money if you win them. You can also definitely, if you want to, you can go the route of crowdfunding. We actually have a couple of talks about the realities of crowdfunding if you decide to get into that. So you can check out our YouTube for that information. But you can also, you can figure out what your operating budget is going to be if you do really want to focus full time. And you can validate in that process of crowdfunding the idea that, if it's actually interesting to people, if people will actually buy it, because you will either get the funding or you won't. There are also venture capitalists and publishers out there who would be happy to support you. Right now, things are a bit hairy in that a lot of these places, as far as I have heard continuously, are looking for ideas that are more fleshed out. So you might not be able to come with a basic prototype or like a slide deck, for example, and get funding at this point. It's more likely that you're going to be getting finishing funds, which is the concept of, coming to a publisher or a venture capitalist when you're actually pretty close to finishing the game, but you just need like a little bit more polish and maybe some marketing. So there is an opportunity, of course, still out there for the right folks, but venture capital can be kind of a challenging route to go. You lose a little bit of ownership of your game, but it is absolutely valid, and I really respect people who, of course, go that route. This is all to say that you should really find a way to make games that works for you. Again, it's just really important that you are satisfied creatively, financially. You can pay your rent if you have to pay rent. You can eat, you can support your family if that's something you have to do. And you don't need to be anxious and like really potentially hurting your own body with the stress of worrying about what happens next to you. I think games are incredible, but I also think that you need to be realistic. So really think about what your needs are, what your budget is, and then figure out what's going to work for you. Next, do not compare yourself because your path is unique and everybody is on their own individual journey. So what I mean by that essentially is that I've definitely been in situations where, I've seen other people succeed and I kind of was like, oh, like, why don't I have that? Like, what's wrong with me, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's kind of going at their own pace. And instead of kind of coming to them with that kind of energy or, beating yourself up essentially, it's really important to figure out how you can reframe that information and maybe look at them and see, what they might be doing. So for example, are they getting mentorship from other people? Are they getting support? Are they going to events and connecting with people? Are they meeting the press? You can actually start to kind of ask them for some details. And maybe, for example, they actually went out of their way to get a mentor. Is that something that you can do? I know that sometimes people feel really nervous about the idea of reaching out to folks for mentorship, but honestly, as a developer of color, you're going to have situations where people aren't going to think that's what you need, or they're not going to know that you need mentorship. And so unless you actually reach out to them, you might not get it. But sometimes you're going to find those mentors in places that you don't quite expect. They might not be developers of color, for example. They might just be people who have been around in the industry for a while. And it's really helpful to express the things that you actually need. And that's something, for example, that I learned by not really comparing myself per se, but really just by looking at other people who were successful and reflecting on what they were doing. And one thing I realized is, for example, that they were being vulnerable and they were letting people know what they needed and asking for support and asking questions. And I wasn't. So I started actually reaching out to folks to actually start getting that support. And that was really helpful, for example, for my thesis that I did when I went to grad school. I actually had reached out to a really great developer who was working at that school. And I didn't really expect him to say yes, but he actually did. And that was really incredible because, if I hadn't actually shot my shot, then I wouldn't have got the chance to work with somebody who honestly is kind of prolific in the industry. And yeah, there's just little things like that where, you got to put yourself out there and you just don't really know what's going to happen. Next is kind of similar. I kind of alluded to this with the last lesson, but it's really important to keep a learning mindset, because if you focus more on the lessons that you can take from situations, whether it's comparing yourself, to other people or trying not to, whether it's a success that you've had, whether it is a failure that you had, it's really important to make sure that you are understanding what you can take from that and build into the next better version of yourself, really. Obviously, you don't want to cut yourself down or anything like that, but it is really important to make sure that you're regularly reflecting, because games is all about learning. It's about iterating. It's about doing better. There's so many ideas out there, but it's really about how you execute. And so the more that you can actually learn from your past mistakes and your past successes, you're setting yourself up for more success. So essentially what that means is that every moment and every interaction also that you're having with people contains some kind of an insight. So make sure that you're capturing that in some way, whether that's taking notes or something else. Next and finally, pull others up with you. This is really important. Sometimes people have this phrase, which is like, skinfolk ain't always kinfolk. And I know that that's a thing, but I also feel like if we're going to actually dismantle white supremacy, if we're going to get to a world where we don't have to worry as much about like how we look and how others perceive us, then we need to actually be winning together. And what that means is you need to make sure that the people who look like you, the people who are out there who are struggling just like you are, you're helping each other succeed. So if you learn something, please share it with other people, because otherwise we're going to keep having these issues where like one person succeeds and then they get up there and they cut the ladder below and then everybody else is still struggling, and that is not a good time. So examples of organizations that you can go to if you want to join and commune are, of course, GDOC Expo. We would love to have you at our event in September. Black in Gaming is also a really prolific foundation that has events, some of them of which are at, for example, the Game Developers Conference. And then there's Latine in Gaming as well, if you are a person who would like to commune with your fellow Latin Americans. There are so many other organizations that are also out there. If you are, a woman, for example, there are women in games groups as well. But really just, we got to do this together. And with that, you got this. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my talk. And if you think of questions later, you can check out my website where I write a bunch of thoughts about this. And again, remember to go to the Game Does the Color Expo in September. Cheers.